What's up, guys? If you are new here, thank you so much for tuning in to our live Facebook video for tonight. This is going to go on YouTube as well. Be sure to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel and join our kind of Facebook group, which is called Mobility Simplified for Weightlifters. Really kind of happy to have you guys and to be able to do these calls with you where we're giving you free content and tips and tricks on pain science for this month. Right. So we are going to dive into the topic for this month, which is pain science, right? But we're talking about part 3 tonight. We've already gone through, we've done part 1 and 2. I'm talking about different pain factors because pain is super multifactorial, right? And this is based out of a book written by a kind of a doctor of physical therapy named Tom Walters. So this is not information from me. This is all from his book. If you guys want that, let me know, and I'll post the link down below, like I've been saying before. We're going to be tackling these factors, which are diet, genetics, environment, history, and trauma, and then culture and meaning. Those are our 3 main topics for tonight. So let's dive in. I want to keep this short for you guys. Number 1 is diet. Right? People always ask me, like, does my diet affect how my pain is or how I'm healing? Should I eat more protein when I'm hurt, or should I eat more carbohydrates? Should I cut back on trans fats? And really, guys, I'm not the right person to tell you that. I'm a physical therapist. I have a minor in nutrition. I don't know a ton about it, but I'd rather you go see a nutritionist or a dietitian and get specific kind of answers from them. But there are some studies that show that inflammatory foods, such as highly processed things, right, like stuff in your freezer with a lot of sodium and things like that to keep it fresh so it doesn't go bad, contain refined carbohydrates, right, trans fats, and even excessive amounts of sugar, right? And there's studies that show that all of these things mixed together may sensitize nerves to make them potentially more throbbing, aching, or causing dull pain in your body. So that makes food an important factor in developing chronic pain. Right. So if you had pain and you eat really crappy or you eat really shitty foods, I should say, right, over time, that can actually add to your pain symptoms and make them worse. And it could result in throbbing, aching, or dull pain. And this is based on studies, not just me telling you. And I've actually noticed this myself because I have a shoulder issue. When I tend to eat more poorly, right, I tend to get less sleep too. And that also plays a role in it. And we talked about that last week. So if you haven't seen what we talked about with sleep, go back and watch that. All right. So really, the less healthy you are, the more susceptible to pain you become. That's the way to kind of just recap that kind of whole thing we just mentioned, right? Unhealthy eating can be tied to lack of sleep, like we talked about. One of my clients this morning actually told me she's been getting 5 hours of sleep, and she just had a weird shoot up and increase of pain in her hip, and we're dealing with her foot. And I'm like, what's going on? And she told me about the history of her hip and how she had hip impingement, right? Some labral issues in the past. And, we kind of put it all together. I asked her some deeper questions, and we kind of put together that she's not sleeping a lot. It led to her getting groggy, led to her eating more poorly. And I think that's affecting how she's doing in terms of her rehab. And that's why her pain's shooting up a little bit as well. So another important factor is that the dietary needs, are going to be unique to the individual. So that's why, like, I open up the call with saying you should see a dietitian or a nutritionist, because they're going to probably give you something totally different than what they would give me. Right. And I would spend that initial investment on them because, like, all you need to do is pay for it once, then you eat that way for the rest of your life. Right. And you're going to feel better, and your body's going to feel like you have more energy throughout the day, which is going to help excel you in other areas of life too, whether it's family, business, etc. All right. But in general, right, I always recommend people get food sensitivity tests. You can get that through a naturopath or a doctor through blood work. And that's going to tell you what foods you're allergic to, so what you need to stay away from, and what you should eat more of that your body actually benefits from. Okay. So keep that in mind. So number 2, genetics, environment, and history, and trauma in detail. That's what we're going to be talking about here. Chronic pain often begins with inflammation, right, of a traumatic injury you had. Maybe you had a whiplash injury where you're in a car accident, right, and you didn't really get chronic pain from that. Maybe it went away in a month or two, right? There are studies that show only 30 to 50% of people develop chronic whiplash symptoms. So it just depends. And there's research that says that there's an interaction between genetics and your environment that can kind of play a role with how you kind of react to certain things and how you kind of develop more acute or chronic symptoms, right? So those people who tend to get raised a certain way are going to respond differently than others who get raised another way, right? And your environment can include your family, your history, your social pressures, meaning like the 5 people you spend the most time around. I'm sure you've heard that before, right? Who hasn't? And what happens is, like, take 2 scenarios. There's athletes who I treat all the time, especially who are involved in contact sports like football, for instance. And they tend to have a greater pain tolerance because they're seen as weak from their counterparts if they complain about pain all the time, or they complain to their trainer, their therapist, right? So they suck it up. And that's not always a good thing, right? Because they can actually get a huge injury and be out for a long time, or it can be a season ending or career ending injury because of that. And on the flip side, guys, there's parents who overreact to your child's, or their child's, I should say, scrapes, bruises, right? Little things that go on. And this actually makes the child more sensitive and kind of lowers their pain threshold over time, right? So you have the athlete who has a super high pain threshold, and you have the kind of young, like kid who their parents like just crying over them having scrapes and bruises, and they have a really low pain threshold. Both of those things can affect both people negatively, right? But the good thing is you can modify and change these things later on in life. You surround yourself with the right people, and you get the proper education that you understand that's not complex, right? And then the last thing here is that genes can kind of link to autoimmune conditions too, as you guys know, right? The most common one is celiac disease, right? Where you become allergic to things like gluten, right? So you can help by eliminating certain foods like breads, and that will help actually decrease your pain, even if you're dealing with like something going on in your joints, right? So guys, if there's anything to take from this section, it's that while you're doing PT, you may need to work with a psychologist to overcome those mental kind of issues in your mind. Because if your mindset's not right there, it can affect that trauma and that injury symptoms that you're kind of experiencing. All right. And then number 3 here, and our final topic for tonight is culture and meaning. This one's so cool, and we never talk about it at all, just because it's kind of like an awkward thing to bring up when we're kind of going through our initial evaluations with patients. I feel more comfortable doing it now because I've been doing PT for so long. When I first started, I was so uncomfortable with talking about someone's culture or asking them culture questions, right? Because you don't want to offend them, especially now, right? Our culture's a lot different now than when I started PT. But nevertheless, there's a really cool story from the book of where we're getting all this information from, and it talks about an Amazon tribe. And I mean Amazon, right, being kind of the South area that requires boys to get stung by bullet ants as a rite of passage, right? So they all have to do this at a certain age to become men, so to speak, right? And what they found is that when people do these painful things, like when these boys get stung by the ants, it's part of their cultural practice. So it's actually normal, right? So they often experience less pain because it's considered normal, right? So that's something very, very important to depict, is that pain science shows that kind of meaning can modulate your pain experience because less fear comes with it. So if you're supposed to do something and everyone around you is doing it and they're all not really experiencing pain from it, sometimes it's going to change your mindset around it, and your nervous system is going to react differently too, because you don't fear it and you're not anxious about it. So that's very, very important. And that's a very cool thing that actually comes about quite a bit. And the other thing is some people also ignore pain as a sign of culture of strength, right? So pain ignorance can lead to serious injury. This brings us back to what we just talked about with people in contact sports, tend to ignore their pain because they feel like they're tough. They have maybe they have a big ego, or maybe they just don't want to be seen as weak. And that can actually lead to a lot of issues down the road. So you definitely want to talk to a psychologist or a physical therapist about this if you're someone who falls into either of these categories, right? And then we talked about the kid, right? Some people tend to exaggerate pain quite a bit just because their parents made them that way. So it's not their fault, but they may develop a high sensitivity to that. And then that can indicate an actual injury. And that happens to a lot of people. I treat a lot of people do Brazilian jiu-jitsu, and jiu-jitsu is tough. You tend to get hurt quite frequently and quite often. It's about like, pretty much getting you in the right mindset, knowing that you're probably going to get hurt at some point doing this intensive sport. So be prepared for it, and be prepared to like do a lot of exercises in terms of rehab to counter what's going to happen or when something does happen, right? And if they know that and I pre-frame that for them, then they feel more comfortable actually doing jujitsu, and they're not sitting there nervous like, oh, I'm going to get hurt. I'm going to get hurt. Because if you feel like you're going to get hurt, you are eventually going to get hurt. That's the way life works. It's very strange in that aspect. So guys, the best strategy I'm going to kind of recap the video with here is if you have pain with a certain exercise or type of movement, whether it's playing a sport, right, lifting weights in the gym, squatting, whatever it may be, is that you want to implement small doses of that activity and try and increase that dose over time, right? Start down here. It's like climbing stairs. It's just like with medication. You should start on a small dose if you have to use medications, and then increase the dose over a long period of time. Because if you increase too quickly, you're going to get side effects and your body's going to shut down. And that's not a good thing, right? Same thing with if you're doing too much activity, right? I have that person from this morning. They were doing too much activity that I talked about, one of my clients, and they were on 5 hours of sleep and eating poorly, right? What's going to happen is your body's not going to accept that, and you're going to develop more pain, because pain's a signal telling you got to slow down or you got to stop. Something's wrong. It's a check engine light going off. So doing so and dosing your activity, just like medications, will decrease sensitivity of your nervous system. And not only because the physical activity is graded nicely, but also because you're participating in activity that you value. So you should still do the things you love, even though it causes some symptoms. You just want to scale down how frequently you're doing it, or the intensity or duration of it. Okay. So, guys, thank you so much. Now you're aware of how your diet, genetics, your environment, right, some history and trauma, and even culture and meaning can play important roles in your levels of pain. So if you kind of missed anything here, because I tend to talk too fast, or at least my clients tell me that, go back, watch it. Right, this will be on YouTube for you guys. Be sure to like and subscribe to our channel. We have one more video coming up on tips and tricks around pain factors. Thank you guys so much for tuning in, and we'll see you in the next one.